This is episode number 141 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. First, before we get started though, let's have a quick chat about our sponsor, 1791 Gunleather. Centuries ago, the original patriots of this country fought and died for promises they protected in the Constitution. Chief among those promises was the right to bear arms. Now, generations later, 1791 protects that right and our firearms. Makers of the 2020 Holster of the Year, the end results of every 1791 holster is a mastery of craft and function, customizable to any firearm you require. 1791 Gunleather provides in the way only an American company can. For more information, visit 1791gunleather.com. Today we're going to answer the question most avid gun enthusiasts have asked themselves at some point. I wonder if I could become a gunsmith. My discussion today is with Special Assignments editor Roy Huntington to get his insights on the question and what he's discovered from his years of working on firearms. Now here's Roy Huntington talking about, should I be a gunsmith? Good afternoon, Roy.
Good afternoon, sir.
Well, you had a great idea for a podcast, and we're going to talk about it today because I think there's a lot of folks out there that have at least, I would almost say every shooter at some point has had this thought cross their mind, and that is, I want to become a gunsmith. And you've been down that road, and you know a lot of literally the top guiding lights in the industry. And today we're going to talk about if somebody really wants to take that leap and really become a professional gunsmith, maybe you can offer them some insight on how to do that.
You know, I hope you don't like to eat regularly if you want to be a gunsmith or plan on living in a house that you own, or
I guess it's kind of like the restaurant industry. You know how to make a little money in the restaurant industry? Start with a lot.
Yep. It's like the cobbler's kids don't have shoes,
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing, and this is the biggest caution to remember, is that there's a lot of hobbies that get ruined when they turn into businesses.
True.
And in the gunsmithing side of things, there's a lot of businesses that get ruined when they turn into hobbies.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people who are gun people, and they look and they've got a lot of ammo and a lot of guns, a lot of reloading, and they think, hey, I'm going to open up a store and I might as well make money with my hobby.
Right.
And it just rarely works. I mean, I virtually almost don't know of anybody who was successful at that, because you're taking a non-business person and suddenly making them into a business, and they don't know what to do. I mean, and I've seen those, and you've seen them too. They'll waste your time all day there while they stand behind the counter and talk guns to you.
Yep.
But their store is falling apart around them.
And I think that happens in other endeavors too, that, you like whatever you're doing, if you work on motorcycles or you oil paint, I've got all this stuff, I've got all this experience, I'm going to hang out my shingle and do it professionally. And people do not look at it as a business. And that's first and foremost what it is. Profit loss. You have to turn a profit or you're not going to be there very long. And like you said, I was just thinking of many gun stores I've been to that everything is in disarray, but the owner will stand there and talk guns with you for 3 hours. And then in 6 months, they're not there anymore because it's a business, and that you have to look at it that way. If you just want to talk guns, go down to the range a little bit more or something.
One of the most successful retail gun stores I ever knew was started by a guy who wasn't a gun guy.
Really?
He was a businessman. And he looked at his Midwest community and he realized, because he had friends who were shooters and hunters, and he realized they were being underserved. So after doing imagine this, market research, right? And realizing where's the competition, how much is shipping, what is the market here? He opened up a modest sized sort of full service gun store.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you went there, it was clean and it was orderly, and he had new product, and and respectful staff. And it was successful, and he opened up several more locations. And, well, that's what Larry Potterfield did with Midway. I mean, Larry was like just born as a businessman who happened to be in a shooting community, and then you look at where Midway is now, and that he wouldn't have gotten there if he was just a weekend shotgun dove hunter, who wanted to open up a store. So having said that, I think if someone has a hobby and they like to gunsmith and they're interested in it and they've got a growing collection of tools and, and if they're like, my experience has been, if you can fix guns, pretty soon everybody that and people you don't know find out about it. And they start coming to you saying, can you fix my gun? Can you fix my gun? Can you fix my gun? Well, you reach that point, though, where it becomes not a fun hobby anymore. And you look down, you've got 10 guns sitting there and it's like, well, I got to fix all these guns because I promised these people. And so usually at that point is when people say, well, maybe I should just hang my shingle out and be a gunsmith.
Right.
It's like, okay. What did we say a minute ago, though? Beware, don't turn your hobby into your business. And so if you don't have the creds to be a business person, then you should just stop right there and just keep your hobby, learn to say no and stuff like that. But there's a lot of things that people don't think about. And that is that, well, FFL, first of all, if you're customizing guns, you may have to have a manufacturer's license. If you're doing any kind of transfer of suppressors or class 3 guns, you have to get licensed for that. And none of these are really small efforts.
Right. The record keeping alone is awful.
Oh, yeah. And the BATF, they don't have a sense of humor.
Not at all.
No, not at all. I mean, they come in and they smile and they say, oh, we're just here to make sure that you,
we just
do what we ask. Yeah, have compliance. And it's like, well, no, actually, they will give you citations and they will shut your store down and they will revoke your license and they will do all these things. And I'm not saying maybe you deserved it. I don't know. But I think then, of course, if you some areas won't allow you to work out of your house, which means you have to get a storefront or a place in an industrial complex. So now you have the weight of rent over your head and utilities and rental insurance and liability insurance, which people forget about that because, I mean, if I just fixed your 22 and you take it out and it blows up, or you shoot your neighbor's dog with it, well, you are absolutely in the liability line now, whether you really are or not. And so I'm familiar with a small gunsmith in town here, and he keeps a liability policy, and it costs him, I want to say it was about $1,200 a year as a kind of an umbrella liability policy. Yeah. And a lot of people say, oh, well, no, I'm not going to worry. Well, okay. I'll see you in the poorhouse someday, maybe. Right.
Exactly. And then unless you plan on working 90 hours a week, you're going to have an employee or 2 or 3. And that's a whole nother can of worms that is unpleasant to deal with in a lot of cases.
It really is. And that's where if you are going to be a Doug Turnbull or a Les Baer or a Bill Wilson or something like that, to where you really are invested in the business side of it, and that's interesting to you, and you want to grow that. If you just want to putter around and enjoy your relationship with firearms and fixing them and customizing them, I hardly recommend that you let it remain a hobby. Yeah. Now, what you can do, though, is you can become what I would call an advanced hobbyist. And so, that's kind of what I would refer to myself as, is I've never been a commercial retail gunsmith. I've done some gunsmithing for some stores on a few occasions where I would go into the store, and work on some guns there at the store for them. But I tend to just mostly do work for myself. Hey, I want to build this custom gun, or I want to do fun things with these guns, or friends that I know, and so it's still fun. You don't have that looming over your head. I like to build furniture and work with wood. And there's been a lot of people who said, oh, well, would you build a kitchen for me? And I always say, well, no.
Yeah.
If you want to have a $8,000 kitchen, go to Home Depot. Yeah. I imagine if somebody said, would you build a kitchen for me for $50,000? Well, that might be interesting, sure. To be able to do some true custom kind of work like that. And so so I don't want to be a naysayer, but there are the mechanics, and a lot of people are enamored with the tools. Mm-hmm. Oh, if I buy a Dremel, then that makes me a gunsmith. You know, it's mystifying sometimes what you get. I get guns all the time that I look at it and I think, man, I don't know anything about this. Mm-hmm. You know, so if I had a business and I was trying to make it work, I have to know about that stuff. Yep. You know. I mean, so many people today I call them parts replacers right. I don't mean that the way it sounds entirely, because there's customizing, but it's like Glock AR-15, you know, kind of stuff. And there are people who build a business around that, basically customizing these guns with drop-in parts. And there's a certain amount of gunsmithing and fitting to go in, but that's made that end of it more popular. Having said that, there's also the demise of the general gunsmith, like the demise of the general practitioner. Yeah. You know, I mean, because I'm going to ask you right now, if you needed to get a surplus Mauser action drilled and tapped for a scope mount, where would you take it?
I'd have to send it away.
Yeah. And you probably have to look to try to find someone who would do it for you.
Yeah.
You'd probably call me up and say, hey, Roy, do you know anybody who does this?
Yeah,
right?
Well, I got this Mauser I'm bringing out.
Yeah. And so for me, and I think the demand that's on my time the most from on the gunsmithing side of things are what I would call general repair work. And so, you know, if you wanted to hang your shingle out in a kind of an informal way, you know, if you're allowed to work from home in your vicinity, get yourself a modest liability policy. You can't do this unless you have an FFL. So get a basic FFL, which is doable, right? And then go ahead and just do some general gunsmith work, fix broken 22s, you know, but you have to learn to say no, though. You know, Clint Eastwood said a man's got to know his limitations, right? You know, so if a guy comes in with a Belgian Browning $30,000 shotgun and needs you to do, you know, stop and go, you know, put the Dremel down. So
one thing that I heard this idea a long time ago is, you know, one of the problems, you look at the gunsmithing industry, it's all guys our age and older. There are very few young gunsmiths, and I can tell you of a few, but for the most part, the demographic is far older. And I had a guy tell me that if you want to get started, go talk to one of the older gunsmiths and say, can I come in and work part-time when you have too much work? And that way you're apprenticing and you can see if this really is for you. Because it was funny when you were talking, I thought of a writers group I talked to a long time ago, and a guy was talking to, it'd be really cool to be a full-time writer and blah, blah, blah. And he said, I really enjoy writing when I get my muse on. And what he was saying was when the mood hits you, I still experience this, when you really get in the zone, as they say, and you're writing and it's flowing, that is wonderful. And it's those moments I live for. But what about the other 98% of the time? You got a deadline. There's a story you really don't care that much about. You got to do it, and you got to do it well. And I think it's kind of the same thing there, that it's one thing to work on your gun or a friend's gun, but when you've got 10 guns sitting there and it's Friday afternoon and you were supposed to take the family to the lake and, you know, the light bill is due and you got a headache. That's a whole different kind of arena. You really got to love what you're doing. And that quickly separates the folks that really want to do it as a business versus they just enjoy kind of the whole thing.
Well, you know, you're right about all of that. And you're right about the young guys. What I see is there are young graduates of the different gunsmithing colleges. They're usually 2-year programs. They're just now really learning how to deal with today's market, because up until recently, they still had you know, customize bolt action hunting rifles and, you know, re-blue pump action shotguns, rather than, you know, learn to work on Glocks, learn to work on AR-15s, learn to work on modern guns, you know, Springfield products and stuff like that. But what I'm seeing with the younger guys is that because remember, their lives started with Glocks. Yeah. You know, or polymer pistols and AR style guns and stuff. And so they graduate from these colleges or some mentorship program somewhere, but they're not general gunsmiths. Right. You know, and so when you hand them a revolver, they go, I don't really know anything about this. Yeah. You know, so I think if you're interested in it and willing to do it, and if you can find some old guy like me or somebody else who's smarter than I am, who's willing to sort of mentor you, you can at least wet your feet there and see. And you never know, you might be able to inherit, a business after that, But you're really right, though. I put together a custom 1022 for somebody not too long ago, a friend of mine, and he brought me over a bag of parts basically, and we sat around in the garage and I put this gun together. But I was doing a favor for a friend. It bored me completely. Mind-numbingly awful. It was just like there was nothing fun about any of it. Mm-hmm. And then, but that would be your daily bread. If I'm sure that there are people with retail gunsmithing establishments who said, well, if I could build 10 custom 1022s a day, I would do that because it'd pay my rent and pay my insurance and pay my everything. So
right. And you touched on something that it was a question I'm going to ask. So this is a perfect lead in. Do you have to go to formal training to be a gunsmith? And I'm not saying in terms of maybe there's licensing or anything, but is it a requirement? Because I know that's where a lot of the young gunsmiths are coming out of. They can go to, I think it's South Dakota State, and there's various schools. Is that absolutely necessary? Can you still apprentice? Or
I think, yes, going to a 2-year gunsmithing program. What that teaches you is basic tool skills, especially if you don't have any. I grew up, I picked up my first Dremel tool when I was 10 years old. And so, my whole life I've been learning how to use tools and stuff. So if you don't have a lot of experience with that, a 2-year gunsmithing degree will teach you how to run a mill and a lathe and how to buff metal and, how to use a file and how to use abrasive things and how to polish. And, it's going to teach you all that kind of stuff. It's not going to teach you how to be a gunsmith. Yeah. Because you're only going to work on a handful of guns. And most of these programs have these, like, they allow people in the community to bring their guns in and then you fix them for free.
Yeah.
Right. So, but if you're a hunting community, maybe you're just working on bolt action hunting rifles and pump action 12 gauge shotguns, so, so when you're done, you're at a point that if you find some crotchety old guy who's willing to take you on, he's going to have to basically show you everything.
Yeah.
But at least you're going to know a little bit about how to run the tools and stuff. And so I think the most successful sort of gunsmiths I see are people who've had a passion for it their whole life, who've done this, who've, when they were 15 years old, his mom has a picture of him at his workbench in the garage, with his dad's, Remington 700 in pieces, filing on it. Those are the guys that you see go on to become sort of custom gunsmiths. And the guys that I know, they've been in it since their 20s or earlier. I
was going to say that the young gunsmiths I know, they are like you said, the kind of guys that, they were taking apart clocks at age 10 and they graduated to their BB gun at 12 and they are monomaniac almost. That's what they do. That's what they think about, whether they're working or not. And those are the kind of people that do well. And they've made a name for themselves, and we're blessed to know some of those guys. But just because a guy said I graduated from Buckhorn State or whatever with my degree, that'll get you started, but that's merely a start.
It can open a door. The vast majority of them go on to become seasoned Walmart employee veterans. Because it's a tough market out there, and there are some passionate ones. I used to be involved with the American Pistol Smiths Guild, intimately when I was editor at Handgunner. I'd try to help them whenever I could. Yeah. And so these are arguably the 65 or so best pistol smiths in the country. Well, their organization donates scholarships to people who are going to gunsmithing schools every year, like a half a dozen or so, right. A couple $1,000s and some products. And I have met some of these guys at the meetings who are being awarded these scholarships. And boy, a lot of these are, just passionate, interested, but in 1 minute of talking to them is I can tell you immediately who is going to get into the industry and who isn't. Yep. And when you hand them a pre-war Colt that one of the guys there had reblued and done some custom work on, and you look at their eyes and they want to know more, and they you see them in conversation in the corner of the room with the gunsmith who did that work, and they're very, their arms are shaking and they're being waving over their heads and they're pointing at the gun, and these are people, they're on the same level of communication and they're passionate about it. They want to know more. What could I do better? How did you do this? Why did you do this? That kind of stuff. Rather than just the people who go into it and they're like, show up Monday through Friday, they do what the projects, and then they leave and they think that they're going to get a $100,000 a year gunsmith job somewhere.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And that's true in many industries. Gunsmithing is you're sort of an artist in a way. And, unless you're working for one of the big manufacturers, you really don't have somebody standing. You got to know, it's kind of like a doctor. You got to be able to do it. There's not a lot of, hey, wait, can somebody tell me how to do this? So you really have to have that passion and drive to do it from, especially an early age, to where you just think about it continually versus, I just want to get a nice job and maybe tinker with some guns. That's not the kind of passion that's going to move you into the job of a true to definition gunsmith.
And I had never heard that analogy before, but I think you're really right. It's like being a doctor. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to say that to demean doctors, but
no. But it's when you got your hands in a patient, you can't call time out and go, now, is the appendix on the left or is it the right? You got to have these, if he's in my belly, I want him to know that stuff dead cold, personality aside.
Well, it's very subjective. It's not, if you change the spark plugs in a car or take the carburetor off and put it on, you can pretty much teach that to a 10-year-old kid if you want to, within reason. But I think there's still an art to tuning a carburetor. But
sure.
But guns tend to be very subjective, and I can have 10 Smith & Wesson revolvers, and every one of them will be different from the same production run, from the same day, and every single one of them will be different. And so every single one of them would need different attention if I was going to do action jobs on them. And you only learn that with experience and feel. And literally one file stroke on a piece of metal in a gun is the difference between a successful job and a ruined job.
Yep.
And until you know that, it's a minefield. It really is. And that's why I always tell people, if you're interested in this, is go buy X number of different kinds of tools. And I think we did a show about that one day. What tools do you really need? And not very many. And then find yourself a rusty 22 and start practicing on it, because you're going to mess it up. If you mess it up, it's not the end of the world. And then, go from there.
Well, as we close this, I guess we've been a little negative, and maybe not negative, but realistic. This isn't for everybody, even people that really love guns. This isn't necessarily the next step for them, but looking at the industry, where do you think it's going? Because personally, what I see, again, I know a couple of young guns that are really good and making a name for themselves. But generally speaking, it's old farts like us. And it seems to me like the torch is not being passed. Do you think there's a future for gunsmiths, or is it all going to be AR-15s, wrench them together to the correct torque, and you've built a gun?
As our younger readers get older and their firearms interests expand, and they're buying revolvers, and they're buying, like Nick, our videographer guy is, we're almost kind of forcing him to expand his knowledge, and, and he's shooting different guns, and he's being interested. He's asking good questions. And what they're going to realize is that they need the services of a good gunsmith, beyond just replacing your sights on your Glock, And so, well, I have a friend of mine here who's basically builds custom 1911s, HS Customs, and some nice revolver work and things like that. But one of the biggest requests he gets almost every day is for general gunsmithing.
Yeah.
And can you fix my broken 22? My revolver doesn't time right. Can you fix that? My bolt action 16 gauge shotgun I inherited from my father doesn't work. Can you fix it for me? It's really amazing. I think the market will always be there for custom guns. But I think even though you may not make a huge living, if you're a good general gunsmith, and maybe you build some custom guns on the side, to expand the, purse a little bit.
Right.
I think that those people are going to be around for a long time. And I'm not seeing a lot of people getting into it there. it's fancy and fun and glitzy to build cool AR-15s with all kinds of stuff hanging on them. And, if you have sleeve tattoos and a pierced nose, that crowd, but no, I mean, it's the reality. I mean, if you go to one of these shops, we have a shop in town here, and it's like, if you go in, that's who's there.
Yeah.
Right. Which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a pretty vertical market. Yeah. And if you were to go in there with your broken 22 and say, could you fix this? They would all just stare at you.
Right.
So, yeah, I think if you're a bit of a hobby guy now and you like to fix your own guns, keep doing that. And if you're passionate about it and your knowledge continues to grow, and you buy all of JB Wood's assembly and disassembly books from Gun Digest, and you buy a better Dremel tool, and maybe you buy a little tabletop lathe someday, and learn how to use that. And then maybe someday you'll buy a little tabletop milling machine because you want to get more interested in that kind of stuff. Just keep doing that and have fun with it. But I would think seriously before you want to actually hang your shingle out.
Gun riding was really fun till you do it full time.
I know. You were right about that too. It's like, I look at our key writers, guys like Masada Ayub and John Taffin and some other people like that. And if you say, hey, write this article about this gun, if they don't even like the gun and they don't want to have anything to do with it, you'll still get a professional article.
Exactly.
It'll be well-researched. It'll be on time.
Yep.
It'll be the right length. It'll have photos,
and that's why we call them professionals.
Yeah. And so that's what it is. If you're a hobby guy and you open up a store, guess what? You're going to crash. Can I end this with a very short story?
Sure.
I was talking to Frank Brownell, his father, Bob Brownell, founded Brownell's Corporation, a big gunsmithing supply house. Right. And this was years ago, 25 years ago. I was talking to Frank and I said, Frank, how do you know when a business is successful? One of your clients, basically. And he said, I always call businesses every year. I'm always calling businesses and talking to the owners. And if I call an owner and he's got all the time in the world to talk to me, he said, then I promise you that if I call him back next year, he won't be there.
Yeah.
He said, if I call and I say, can I talk to the owner? And somebody there says, wait a minute. And they put their hand over the phone. I hear muffled talk for a second. And then this kind of harried sounding guy picks up the phone and says, Bill here. Yeah. What can I do for you? He said, and then if I talk to him, but while I'm talking to him, he's always going, okay, could you hang on a second? Yeah, it's $29.95. Tell him it's on the back shelf. Have that delivery truck stand by for a minute. Okay. I'm sorry. What were you talking about again?
Yep.
He says, that guy I know, he's going to be there next year.
Wow.
And I thought it was the best analogy I ever heard in my life. And so if you're the first guy, don't open up a gun store.
Yep. It's funny. I like to fish. People know that. It's kind of like bait shops, the ones that are successful, you go in and you buy your stuff and, you get a little local flavor and local knowledge. But the ones where you can't get out the door because they just want to talk, they won't be there next year.
I know. You're right. Yeah. Can I leave with one more?
Absolutely.
It's from Frank, because it's true for any business. I said, what's the success to Brownells? And he said, my dad sat across from me one time. He said, all your customer wants is a dead pheasant. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, this was his dad talking. He says, our customers don't care that Mod called in sick, that the delivery driver didn't show up, that the bridge got flooded out, that the manufacturer didn't get their order on time, that we're having a bad day, that the phone system's out. They don't care. They just want a dead pheasant because they're going pheasant hunting next week and they need that part.
Yep.
And he said, so if you remember that and you remember to just keep supplying your customers with the dead pheasant that they want, and then all this other stuff, that's fine. But that's your problem. It's not your customer's problem. And I thought, what great advice. And it works for any business in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They just want a dead pheasant. And you know what? I've used that same thing with our readers.
Yeah.
Our readers just want a dead pheasant.
Yep.
They just want to be entertained. They want 45 minutes or an hour with their latest issue of Guns Magazine to just be happy and relaxing. They don't care that paper costs more. They don't care that we got pulled from the stores. They don't care that there's a shipping fee now,
Trust me, you don't want to see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, they just want a dead pheasant. So remember that about your customers if you want to do
The Dead Pheasant Paradigm by Roy Huntington. I like that idea.
Frank Brownell.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay. Well, Roy, thanks for those words of wisdom. I hope that will open the eyes of some folks that are considering making that leap. And again, you speak from experience. So thank you very much.
All right, but it's always fun.
I hope we didn't stomp on anybody's dreams in this episode, but I do think we presented some genuine questions you need to ask yourself before hanging up your shingle as a gunsmith. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course you can always listen at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, please don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at americanhandgunner.com, americancop.com, and our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites. Most of all, while you're online, I would really appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.